you. So the workshops this semester are going to be focusing on systematic procedure for analyzing qualitative data. So it's going to start today with data cleaning, and I'm also going to be talking a lot about what is qualitative and some debunking some stuff. The 27th is data prep and qualitative coding, and then the analysis is at March. So just a reminder that the two on February 27th are held in conjunction with the qualitative methods course. So that one it is a big classroom, but I think there's already 30 students in there. So that one, I'm trying to figure out how does it work on Zoom. So just a heads up that one might be more virtual for the students not in the class, but I will keep you updated. So just a series overview. So my goals for this semester are to debunk myths about qualitative research, to discuss these systematic procedures, and then to allow you to do some reflection and application for your own interests. The overall structure is that I'm going to do a presentation on a topic. We're going to do some guided practice with example data from one of my current projects, again, that my students are working on. And then we're going to answer questions. I'm going to answer questions specific, general questions, and ones more specific to your own projects and interests. So we're going to start with some qualitative myths about, or some myths about qualitative research. So again, I cannot emphasize enough that these are myths. I don't want anybody to kind of just like half listen and be like, oh, this is true. These are not true. So the first one that I see a lot is that it's not theory driven. People will say, I just want to see what I see. Even grounded theory starts with a big T theory, right? You don't just go in there and you're like, I'm going to look at things. You still know what you're going to be looking at, and it's still grounded by your review of the literature. That it's not planned. I have had arguments with people who have said, you just gotta go in there and see what I see. And I'm like, nope, that's not how that works. That it has less structure than quantitative research. Nope. And people like, oh, it depends on what I find. So whatever I find, I will go from there. And again, yeah, it is less rigorous than quantitative research. Those of you that have actually done it knows that is a blatant lie. But this is really important because when you're doing qualitative research, you really have to switch your mind frame. So I work with a lot of students who do quantitative research, and then for whatever reason, they want to do qualitative research. And switching that like mind frame, all those philosophical assumptions is really important, because the phrase I always use is getting out in front of the haters, okay? Because people think this about qualitative research. So then when you submit this for publication, you got to get out in front of this. So people are like, oh, it's not rigorous. Show them it's rigorous. Oh, it's not planned. Show them your plan. So you really have to switch your mind frame and know that this is what people think about it. And hopefully you're not one of them, or I can convince you. But I always call it getting out in front of the haters. So my method section is always like super long, because I'm like, I did this and then this and then this for this reason, and not this reason, but this reason, et cetera, et cetera. Some say that it's too subjective. Again, this is where you get into paradigms and philosophical assumptions. I kind of tend to think of people as more subjects than objects. So the whole subjective thing doesn't bother me, or I don't even really agree with that. But again, going back to the rigor, there are ways to make your findings more valid and more reliable. So if you only have one coder, people say that's too subjective, right? But if you detail a very complex coding procedure, which I'll talk about at the next session, you're making and you do inter-rater reliability, you're making your findings more objective for those people that matters. And some will say it's not generalizable. It's not. That one is true. But it's not the point, right? And so everyone will say, oh, but you can't generalize. I wasn't trying to generalize. Like, again, getting out in front of those haters and in the limitations, I had a small sample size. I'm so sick and tired of saying it because that's not the point. So then what is the point, right? And so most of the research I do is about understanding the data and the context and developing hypotheses. So I do a lot of mixed methods. So I develop the hypotheses that the quant people test. They don't even thank me for it either. So these are the common myths again. But I hate when people say it's not generalizable. I would argue too that most quantitative isn't generalizable. Sorry, Christy. Because like context, situation specific stuff, but that's an argument for a different day. So then what comes after data collection, right? So we've collected data, and that's the part. Is everyone's like, okay, what do I do with all this data? I'm gonna stop you because that depends on what comes before the data. The problem statement should be clear. The literature should be reviewed. The research questions should be finalized, and the research design should be planned. I see too many people collecting data, and then they're like, what do I do? And I'm like, well, what was your goal in collecting the data? So all your decisions all your decisions during data collection should be guided by these, and all the decisions after. And the thing is, you can do this back. You can do any of qualitative data poorly. You can do any analysis poorly. And you can always go back and redo it. Or you can think about it and plan and do it better the first time. And don't forget about your REB. Like, always that little guy should be right here. Like, can I do that? Should I do that? So then let's talk about why y'all are here. Data cleaning. So what does data cleaning mean? It's similar to what you're going to see in like quantitative research. It is my least favorite part. Yeah, no, it's the worst. It's because you're like, I have data, and it's like super messy. You're like, just let me, And so this is a very short definition. I'm going to show you more examples. But it's basically fixing or removing faulty data. So any data that's like corrupt, for whatever happened in the system, any duplicate data for whatever reason, any incomplete data. In quantitative, you might remove outliers as well. We don't really have that in quantitative data. But basically, it's like just getting the data ready to analyze. Okay? That's a very oversimplification. So why do we do this? What could happen if the data is dirty? Unreliable analyses, right? So you're like, oh, so I copied and pasted the wrong demographics, and then I'm making all these conclusions based off of data that just doesn't match. Like I didn't put an enter, and so this, little things, it's just too easy to make mistakes when you're data cleaning. And so your data can be really unreliable. And again, you could violate REB violations. So if you don't clean it and then you're sharing it, qualitative data is much harder to de-identify. And so this is something like, oh, you send it to a friend and you're like, oh, that wasn't a secure, or you save it in a Google Drive. That is not secure. So, these are things that could happen. So then what causes data to be dirty? The number one thing I think for me is when you have to pull it from multiple sources. So you have surveys, and then you have interviews, and then you have transcripts, and you're like, how do I match all these data from different sources to the same, to this participant over here and this participant over here? Like, how do we put this together? And then identifiable data. And so I go beyond just like their names. So qualitative has a lot of video data. You really can't make that. You can't really de-identify video data. Audio data, people are on the fence of like, can you, if I took out their names, my voice probably you would be able to recognize. But then the other thing that people don't think about is even in transcripts, if I'm like, la, 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 we're talking, and then I mention like, oh, Dr. Robinson's the worst, she's not, she's right here. She's great. like that data needs to be de-identified. And so there's a bigger question, I think, when you have open-ended text and those kind of things of like, what should be de-identified? And again, I'm going to talk about how to do that in a second. And so then the other one is if you have incomplete or withdrawn participation, especially if you've got a linking document and it's like they've got this ID over here and this ID and just kind of matching it up. And I mean, this thing can get away from you. And I was working on a project during one of my postdocs, and I just started, and it took me about a month and a half to clean the data, and then they found a bunch of mistakes. And so then they brought in an undergrad who had a data science background. It's probably too identifying, but had a data science background, and it took her like a month, and she looked exhausted at the end of that month. I was like, okay, so it's not just me. So I kind of felt better, but I felt worse. And I mean, some of them are just gross. So let's talk about that. Oh, that's supposed to come up one at a time. Yeah.
Is it acceptable? Supposing you are interviewing a bunch of people and then let's say there is a really excessive amount of withdrawal in terms of participation. Is that something that you can report as a finding? You're not identifying anyone, but it's something I've always wanted to validate. If it's a sensitive topic, folks are withdrawing. Is that something that can be reported?
Yeah, so that's so the question is, can you report the withdrawals? I'm going to answer the same way I answer most questions like that. When in doubt, ask REB. Because I could tell you something and think I'm right, and they're the ones that would know. Because again, what data, just the percentage, this percentage of people who started and didn't finish, maybe. But if you're like the female population, because you had to collect that data, and technically, if they withdrew, you should no longer have that data. So these are kind of things. I'm gonna use my two of ask REB and it depends, right? Like, but that's an interesting kind of thing to think about for sure. So the spectrum. So this is what people expect. It's gonna be a little hard to see. These nice, clean dishes. This is what people expect. If like I collected data and this is what I'm gonna get. And this is what simple designs will typically give you. So if I did a survey and I had like one open-ended question, it's a little messy, but doable. Washing by hand even, you know? This is what like complex designs will typically get you, like caked on stuff. You're gonna have to actually put some elbow grease into it, let them soak, which my husband yells at me for. Yeah, a little messier. And then this, I know you can't see this picture. I love this picture. This is what happens when you have no design. And you're just like, I'm going to collect data. I have no plan whatsoever. And then you change something. And then it's like, so the data before the change, can you combine it with the data after the change? Blah, blah, blah. That is a mess. And these slides will be available too on my website in the next few days. So the suggestions. So what are some suggestions for cleaning the data? There are no exact steps because every data set looks different. But you still need to make a plan. That's the only thing that everyone in here should do cleaning data. I mean, there's some other things that you will likely always do, but the only thing you should 100% do is make a plan and document everything. Everything. And guess where that should go? In the method section. People that like, I feel like people love to gloss over all the hard work they did. No, brag about it. Get credit for it. And then if they want you to take it out, then it's much easier to take out than add in 8 months after you're doing an R&R. And they're like, I was like, what did I do? I think I downloaded stuff. Formatting is important for coding and analytic tools. So for example, if you're doing a transcript and you send it off and it gets sent back, do you put the transcript in Word or do you put the transcript in Excel? There's no right answer because it depends on your questions and your data and your analytic tools, right? So I've seen, so I love to use MaxQDA, and so NVivo and some other softwares, and putting a table in there is like an Excel file is kind of tricky. But if you're coding in Excel, which I'm going to show you an example where we code in Excel, you want it in Excel, right? Where it gets tricky is when you are doing like secondary data analysis, and I know this has happened recently to some people I know, where it was done in one way, and then to move it to the other is redoing everything. So because they coded in the Word document, but then they needed to run analysis, they wanted to quantify the codes, which you really need Excel to do in order to upload into SPSS or whatever you want to do. But these are things to think about, right? Interview, I don't think I'd put in Excel in most cases, but maybe. But, you know, and again, will it hurt you to go back? No. Will it take more time? Yes. But so just kind of keep that in mind. Formatting, segmenting, and all those things. Again, we're going to do some stuff next week or in a few weeks. And then de-identifying data. Again, this is more than just names and demographics. You want to remove identifying information, but keep the context when possible. So if I was talking about like, oh, Dr. Lebzowski, I had Dr. Lebzowski's class and she was the worst. You know, I see some people put a blank in there and put just like de-identified or blinded. But then when I go back and I'm coding, I'm like, what was there? So instead of putting like taking out, if you take out Dr. Lebzowski, you could either do doctor and then in parentheses, blinded. So I have some context there that you're talking about, probably a professor, or you just put in professor of class or name of professor, something to give you context so that when you're going back, and again, you're learning through my mistakes. It was just like blinded. And I was like, what were they talking about? Because getting access, so I still have de-identified data is much easier to access than some of the, like you're at home and the videos are stored or on the hard drive here, you might not have access to the videos always. So, or audio, whatever it is. So just make sure that you add context when you're de-identifying data. And then I'm sure this is true for any data. Give those variables some meaningful names and create keys with details. Okay, I've seen some variable names that are literally like, this is where it's like so long, like 20 characters, detailed, but very difficult to analyze and do that kind of stuff. I've seen other where it's like PTS, or not, I almost said PRQT, and I'm like, what does that stand for? Wait, which one is that? So you want to make them meaningful, but then also have a key that's like this variable is, it could be even this question that I asked, or this variable, and it's a summary of what it is. And that should be, and I'll show you, like in the document or near it, so that you can access everything. And then something that not enough people do is start taking notes on the data. You're going to spend a lot of time cleaning the data and you're going to see data. When you start to notice something, and we're going to talk about this again in a couple of weeks with analytic memos, when you start taking notes or when you start to see things, write it down. Even if you never use it, write it down. So you're starting to see like, oh, I had a lot of male students, or I had like, wow, they're talking, I'm seeing this word come up a lot. Write it down. Put it in a place. So in the keys, I have a notes tab that I'm like, just dump all my information there. Okay. Because the longer you spend with the data, the better you know, the more notes that you take, the better your analysis will be. Yes. So a key, I'll show you. Like, so on the Excel document, I'll have a like my data in one tab, and in the next tab, I'll have a list of all the variables, and it says like, this is what they are, and this is what they represent. So, because I like to keep them short so I can see them all, like when they're open. But then like you'll see mine, it's like PXT something, and I'm like, what? Oh yeah. I mean, I know what it is because I made it, but when I'm sharing it with other people, you're gonna be like, what is she talking about? So I'll show you it. I'll show you. I'm going to pause for some questions. Lots and lots. And then we're going to move into example. Any questions online? Okay, there'll be more time. So the next thing I want to do is ground you in the example project and some data that we have recently collected. And so I'm gonna talk about the project and talk about the data. Again, the point of this is just to kind of show you if you're interested in what we're doing, but it's more about like giving you some context for where the data came from and what we're doing. But I want you, and then we're gonna do a little activity that's like, what do you think went wrong? Let's see. So we're gonna use this for all the workshops. So this data comes from a project sponsored by an internal grant at McGill. It's called Developing an Assessment to Measure Individual Factors that Impact Socio-Emotional Interactions. So what do individuals bring into a group that impact collaborative interactions? So the problem is that the research on and measurements of small group learning often neglect the contextual factors that impact collaborative processes. So when we're studying students working groups and we see things happening, we don't know what they came into with the group to understand why they're doing what they're doing. And I think a lot of times we see credit given to interventions or things like that when I'm like, no, they didn't like each other before. Like they're fighting not because of this, because they hate each other, or they're best friends and you were never going to have an argument, you know? So we're going to use a design-based research approach to create a new measurement called the Personal Reactions to Emotional Social Situations. If it doesn't have an acronym, you're doing it wrong. PRESS questionnaire. And most of my students, we've been talking about PRESS, and I'm like, I forget what it stands for. So there it is. That might be the first time some of them have seen it. So just very quickly, design-based research involves this iterative process of 3 main phases of this analysis and exploration, design and construction, evaluation and reflection. Again, this is just to ground you in the background. And so then the analysis and exploration phase we started last summer, and we've done a systematic lit review and collected all the common challenges in all collaborative learning, but then we specifically are focusing on university project-based learning environments for this project. In the design and constructions, we created 59 scenarios based off of those challenges. We created a list. We asked ChatGPT to come up with a scenario, and then we edited it a lot, mainly because we didn't want, if I made 59 scenarios, they're all going to kind of sound the same. So we wanted to kind of get some diversity. And so then we gave the scenarios and asked them, how would you respond? And so our next step is to use the open-ended responses to create 5 choices per scenario, which will help us identify student profiles and tendencies. And then we'll move on to evaluation and reflection, which are think aloud and cognitive interviews with professors and students as they use it. But we are right here. So we have collected the data, and we are going to be using that data to see how students respond to these given situations and do some thematic analysis to create 5 choices per scenario. Any questions before? Yeah.
Will the 5 be applied to every scenario, or will they be unique to each scenario?
That's an interesting thing. So we don't know yet. Well, the question was, will the 5 be to all of them? So what we're thinking is that, or what I'm thinking originally is that there's going to be 5 types. And so there'll be, each scenario will have maybe a type. So one of the examples for like, and so an example of the question, let me give you a scenario. I meant to do this. Your group has a task due at the end of next week, and one group member has a sudden medical emergency. They email the others in the group to let you know that they won't be able to complete their part of the assignment. What would you do? from all my research, there's going to be one person that's probably like, I'll just do it, whatever. The other one, oh, we'll take it and redistribute the tasks, and the rest of us will do it. There'll be the tell them to suck it up. And then, of course, I'll email the professor and ask them what to do. So then you're like, yep, and if you didn't have one of those. So that's what so again, it's those underlying principles of like, what are they doing there with the professor? So that's like outsourcing. And so we might have like an outsourcing type response for every single one. We also have 3 different types of scenarios. We have scenarios related to task, so challenges around the task, challenges around non-task. So as students collaborate, there's other things that happen that really aren't related to the task. And then there's one specific to social interactions. So there's a little bit of overlap, but I have tons of papers to read if you're interested in reading more, but that's not the point. So any other questions before I show you the kind of data? Yeah.
Just to make sure I'm understanding, so you ran through it once and like had people reply, and then you looked at the responses and like grouped them into 5 choices?
So that's what we're going, yeah.
Okay, but that's what you
Yeah, that's what we're,
okay.
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Spoiler, yes. Okay, so let's talk about the data. So literally we're going to, in these 4 workshops, I'm going to talk to you about how I clean this data. Then I'm going to talk to you about how I prepared the data, how we coded this data, and then analyzed this data. I had a lot of people ask me about this workshop of like, do people need to bring their own data? And I was like, how long do you think this workshop is? I literally, again, if you're like, oh, qualitative, I need to do this, I would recommend taking the course. I really struggled with like, what can I do in an hour times 4? And so that's why I'm kind of showing you my data, and then I'll ask questions if you have more general things. And some people will argue that open-ended survey data is not qualitative. Again, everyone's got feelings. Philosophical assumptions, right? So, you can see mine here, and they're not right or wrong, they're just mine. So let's talk about the data. So as we're going through here, I want you to wrap your mind around it. If there's any questions, let me know. And then I want you to think about like, ooh, that's going to cause a mess. So we had 59 scenarios. So 59 is a lot to give one person. So what we did was we did 12 different versions with 5 scenarios each. One had 4. I can do math. One had 4. In that, each one had about 2 task-related questions, or maybe 3, 1 or 2 social, and then 1 or 2 non-task. So they were kind of a mix of the different types. And we tried to make sure that they were about different topics. We asked about, at the beginning, the instructions were like, context. You are in a project-based learning environment, college learning environment, think about that and how you would respond. And we said the project includes many tasks too. We didn't really define them. We wanted to leave it open. And so we recruited through Prolific, which is a worldwide platform similar to MTurk. The reason we use Prolific though, is that it has a pre-screening. So if you make an account on Prolific, you fill out some demographic data. And so then when I say I want 18 and older, which everyone on Prolific is, and you have to be currently enrolled in college, then only those that are currently college students will see mine and participate. So I don't have to do a self-selective, like, are you in college? And someone's like, sure, it only goes to them. So that's why, and again, profile Prolific. So that's why we use that. And so we asked people from all over the world. I thought it would take longer to do this. So we had, we opened it up originally to 15, and then I expanded it to 20 college students for each version at different levels. And I thought this will take a while to get all this. So I just opened it, I think on a Sunday afternoon around noon. 2 hours later, they were all complete, which means there are certain parts of the world that are underrepresented because they were asleep. I didn't, so it's one of those, I've got, I'm thinking of like, do I schedule one to open at like 3 a.m. to get more, I don't know. So that's just something kind of you didn't plan for. You might have, think about. I had a plan. I just wasn't expecting that. But recruiting through Prolific, so basically people that use any Prolific users. So you go through, you sign on, you're like, and then you just get a list and you're like, you can read it and you're like, nah, that's not me. You can click it and say, read some more, and you're like, nah, that's not me. Or you can say yes and take it. These 5 scenarios were designed to take about like 10 minutes. Some took 5, some took 45. And then again, they get paid in British pounds, which is always fun, for how long they take it. So we did have some duplicates, which we were okay with across study versions. So nobody took the same survey version twice, but some, like participant 2 might have done the first version and then they saw, oh, there's another one. And we were fine with that. We don't need different people necessarily filling it out. Again, if we thought anyone would sit down and do all 59, we would have. But that wouldn't happen. And again, if you're more interested in crowdsourcing, there was a video from last semester. I had a guest speaker talk more about crowdsourcing. And one of the things that he told us is like, these need to be quick. People go on Prolific to just fill out surveys quickly, which is why we cut it down. And we wanted people to complete them well. Because at 30, probably like my brain hurts. And Prolific provides general demographics. It provides, I think, age, sex, college status, or your current degree, the country you're born in, you currently live in, and then your nationality, which, yeah, and then your first language, and then are you employed? There's other things too. So you can get that data as well. But we collected data in Qualtrics. It's a more secure. So you can write your surveys in Prolific and collect them there, but they're stored there. But so we instead use Qualtrics, which is a much more friendly and a way to collect survey data. And so in there, we had open-ended responses. We put a limit at 15 words, which took a while to do because it defaults to characters. So they had to write at least 15 words. And words are defined by spaces, I do believe, between. So if you put 6 space, that counts as a word. Then we wanted to collect specific demographics. We wanted to collect what was there. So on Prolific, it's like bachelor's, I think master's, or like post-grad was all kind of together. And this one, we wanted to see like what were they, like what specific degree they were currently pursuing. And then we asked what was their major, because we're already seeing some kind of stuff of like, oh, that's very specific to that major. And then we asked, what kind of classes do you typically collaborate in? And so that's for a different thing later. But there was no identifiable data collected. That's because Prolific, you're not allowed to. So I didn't ask them anything that was collected here, and I didn't ask them like email or something. So for another project I have where there was going to be a follow-up, I can't do that through Prolific. I can't follow up unless I could find their Prolific ID. I could do all that. But so when you do the consent form, instead of their name, they just put their Prolific ID, which is a very long 20 plus characters of numbers and letters. And it's very difficult. They all kind of look the same and different. And so then when we are doing that, we are currently doing this. We're like 1 week ahead of the presentation. We're going to use a thematic analysis to understand differences in how people respond. No spoilers. Any questions about the data? Yep, lots of questions. Go ahead.
Were the surveys all done in English or were they translated?
They were all done in English. So one of the things you can do on Prolific is filter that out and say you have to be able to speak English, but because the description's in English, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So A lot of the people, when they put their first language down, it was not English, but they were able to hold on to that. Yes.
Is there any issue with like how you have different people doing different surveys?
Different, you mean the same people doing different surveys?
No, I mean like you don't have them all looking at the same scenario.
Right. Yep. So that's a good point. So even though we have this huge data set, each scenario only has 20 responses.
So can you like compare between scenarios between people?
So the question is, can we compare between scenarios against people? I don't know. Yeah.
Okay.
These are all great questions. And it's one of those thinking about the project and the purpose. We want this to be used by a variety of people and coming from various backgrounds, which is another one of the reasons. The 20 was more out of, again, practicality. It'd be nice if we had 100 people do all of them. At the same time, you're going to get more similar responses, and I think we're looking for differences here. We want to make this so that it's, because when we don't want to do open-ended in the future, and so whenever you're giving 5 choices, we want those 5 to be as representative as possible, that everyone can find some, because it's going to change in the future to not what would you do, of which of these would you be most likely to do. And so the more people we have from various backgrounds, the better we can make those claims. Yeah. Yes.
I'm just curious why you chose different levels. I imagine like a freshman is not something you can see, or was that something you wanted to?
No, we wanted to. So why is it at different levels? That's because at the university level, I teach a problem-based or project-based learning class, and it has freshmen all the way up, and they're mixed. I also wanted to include a lot of, and grad students are in here too, because they do a lot more project-based learning, I think, than some of the undergrads. So I think we're just trying to, but that's why we collected that data, to be able to make, like, if we're seeing things that just aren't, the patterns don't go across different contexts, we want to be able to say that. We don't want to make these claims of like, everyone can do that. And then one more thought. There are 59 questions. When we use this in the future, our plan is that these become a library of scenarios, so that when a professor wants to use them in his or her class, their class, they can kind of pick which ones are the most relevant. So one of them, for example, talks about the group leader. Well, not all projects have a leader, right? So if in my class, I'm like, well, that's not really relevant. Or there's one like on a presentation. I don't do a presentation. I get to kind of craft it to my specific context. And so that's something we're going to pursue in the future. Yeah, but go ahead.
Just relatedly, if you were to say, hey, I want to use this specific way versus others, I think we need some sort of theory backing.
Right. We would need, yes. So to focus on, and that's one of the reasons why this is not for all collaborative learning. We specifically looked at the university level, because what project-based looks like here and what project-based there's evidence to show that they're different. And I don't know off the top of my head if there's evidence, because what about the levels? Is it like, what about the first years versus the third years would make them different? Is it the age? Is it the major? So I think it's a complex thing to understand qualitatively and develop to understand and then develop hypotheses. Great question. Yes.
Is there a reason you chose 59 scenarios? You mentioned at one point you're like, and not 16.
Yeah. So in hindsight, we should have just made up one more. What we did is we combed the literature, did a systematic literature review, and came up with, I think there was actually closer to 50 different challenges, but then some of them, like prior knowledge, needed to be split into 2, because there's one where I have less prior knowledge than others. What would I do? And then some where other people had less prior knowledge. How do I handle that? So again, we went in completely, it wasn't like, this is how many we need. I'm sure my students were like, please stop. And again, in hindsight, just should have made one more, but sticking to a plan. Yeah, but great question.
Is saturation something you're looking for in this study? And if so, would you recruit more participants if needed?
Yeah, I think that I'm open to that. The question was if reaching saturation, and I think that's interesting. I again, with only 20, I'm more concerned about missing something than reaching saturation in a way that's like we need 5 different and we have 3, and it was saturated around one thing. But I think there's something in that, right? And so for example, some of them, it might be that all 20 people from all over the world, all different backgrounds answered, they're like, I would do this the same way. Then do we need to include this question, right? Do we need 5 responses? So, and some of our responses were like, I don't see a problem here. Like I wouldn't do anything. So yeah, so that's a great question. Yes.
Do you need a critical mass of students with similar characteristics to then draw trends, or is that not like a focus at all?
So again, it's the purpose, right? So if I was trying to design something for a very specific population, but that's not our goal. Our goal is to design something that can be applied more broadly. And just again, one of the reasons I love working at McGill is because of how diverse across so many levels it is. So that's why we really wanted various backgrounds and those kind of things. So we definitely we'll have a lot of validation to do in the future, right? This is the first version for sure. And 5 is just based off of some of the literature that's done similar things to this, the situational judgment literature. Maybe 5's not it. Maybe and 5 and how they do it is like you rank them from, and that is more of like a should. What should you do? This is really about what would you do, because we're trying to understand, because and use it for like group formation, right? So if you've got someone who's like, tell the person in the hospital to suck it up, maybe shouldn't work with the person who's like super empathetic, or things like this. Yeah, or yes, put them all in the same group and say, don't get sick. I see some on the chat. Let me see. How did you, yep, okay. How did you decide between thematic and not content data analysis? That's a really great question. To the point where last night or the night before, I was like, I think I know the difference. Let me look at this. So content data analysis, so thematic, I think content, when I think of content data, I think I kind of know more of what I'm looking for at the beginning. And here I'm really trying to push aside like what I think is going to happen and just see what's going to happen. Because all the hypotheses I've seen are based on my own experiences and my own preferences. And so I want to see kind of what's open. So that's why we're doing more of a thematic analysis. But I would say in my experience, those two are kind of similar other than that. Okay, so we'll come back if there's more questions. So the next slide, which I'll actually keep you here, is on potential challenges. So thinking about data cleaning, where do you think the dirty, the messiness came from? Any hypotheses of like, ooh, I bet you that was tough?
Questions.
People having different sets of questions, yep.
Maybe merge all those together in a reasonable way.
In a reasonable way. We'll see if you decide if mine is reasonable. What else? So I'm looking for a timer so I don't go over. Yeah. Duplicates across study versions, for sure, for sure. Yeah.
You said some people took like a long time and some people took a short time, so maybe like the length of responses with some people doing really in depth and some people just draw some of those.
Yep.
The
Yep.
identifiable data in terms of the circumstances they're speaking about of this professor in the situation.
Right. And we were less worried about, and so what you said is the identifiable information, because these people that use Prolific often and they have such rules about like we were less concerned about that, but definitely need to, versus like a student, especially like K through 12, like they'll just talk about anything, mom and dad, like stuff that they should not be sharing. Yeah.
In general, open-ended is very unpredictable on my studies. You really have no idea whether people are, I kind of go in depth, but also if they understand the question.
Yeah.
And that's a huge issue with open-ended responses.
Yeah.
Like they've not understood what you're asking.
So what you're talking about the quality of the response. And so some of it's like effort and some of it's understanding. And there were a few that you could tell they didn't understand ours. They're like, oh yes, this did happen to me. Great. What'd you do about it? Right. Yeah.
Is there any issue, I know that you said that you didn't get as representative of population worldwide because of the timing and stuff, but is there anything that you need to look at in terms of like culture influencing responses? Do you have to?
So that'll be something that we're actually doing a whole another project on specific scenarios that are more culturally sensitive. But exactly, so if we start to see something, and it's more of like Asia, Australia, and those, because they were asleep. If we're starting to see, we did have some though. So if we start to see in some, then we'll make a decision of like, well, do I have money to do it? And then do we want to open it back up? But and again, we technically could restrict to specific populations, but we'd have to go through REB because that wasn't originally the plan. So if we just went in and opened it up at 3 a.m., it's possible that those night owls, you know, are filling it out then. So so these are again things to think about. So then let me I'm at the point now, I was like, do I show you the data? So when I say that this is de-identified, I literally did a control find and replace like T's with S's and like it's complete gibberish on purpose. This is not what our data looks like.
Thank God.
So this is what the data looks like after cleaning. Oh, this one, for some reason, was in a wrap text. That one too, that was a special one. Thoughts? I don't know why. It did not look like this 10 minutes before we started. The one thing I left off are the demographics. Yeah, those aren't relevant and I don't want to share those.
What is this the open-ended responses?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, so that's the first step is, okay, great, Nikki, what are these? No, that's it. It's like when you see this. So up here, this is version 1, scenario 1, version 1, scenario 2, version 1, scenario 3, all the way to 5. And so these 20 people did these 5 scenarios. These 20 people did these 5. And so you can see it goes all the way to version 12, scenario 5. If you look here, the PIDs, let me find an example. So they count up sequentially, and then all of a sudden you have an 007. Why do I have an 007 down there?
Bond.
He was sneaky. James Bond, yes. Duplicate. So this person not only filled out, what is this one? Version 4, they also filled out version 1. What made it really interesting is some people tried or started to do one and then didn't, and then did one later. So that prolific data. So originally, when I was cleaning, and I'm going to show you the list of what I did, originally, I actually moved these together. So there was some here and then more over here. And then when I started to think about how I would analyze this, I was like, oh, I don't want that at all. I don't, because then I can't put them all together and look at them. So I actually undid some of my cleaning. I made it 2. I rubbed off the paint. I don't know how, the metaphor, I'm done. So, and then here's my key. And so these are the keys that I'm talking about. This is for the codes, which we'll talk about in the next few weeks of like, what are they? The color coding is the type of scenario. So again, this is more about preparation for data, which I'll talk about. And then we're going to talk about how to code one specific one. Beautiful. So if you click each one, you'll see a whole bunch of nonsense. And some people wrote exactly 15. Some of them wrote a lot longer. The joy of coding.
Was there a way that you decided which group got, like, which one only had 4 scenarios? Were they like,
We just randomly assigned, and then one of them got 4. I think it was 11. No, it didn't matter. Yeah, it did say then the description, we did change it to say this one has 4 open-ended questions. All right, so let's look how beautiful. It's still a mess, but the data is messy, right? So then let's look at all the steps that I did to get to that point. So the first one is I downloaded the data from each source and I saved it on a secure hard drive. Remember that the only thing, and so the data from Prolific did not even have the survey name in it. It had the completion code, which we had a separate document that says this completion code for Prolific goes with this survey. And so we had to, that was a whole thing. That was a whole thing. But the Prolific ID is the part that matched. And the Prolific ID, it's just 20, like, or 30, maybe even random characters. It's very hard to see duplicates. So we had to coordinate all that data in an Excel file. So copy and paste into the stair-stepping situation. Oh, I meant to show you one other thing, remind me. That when it came to coding, let me just show you now, actually. I forgot one thing when I was like, okay, let's plan how I'm going to code, because that is my ultimate goal. I had to even clean a step further. And so this is like my final, I am ready to code. So these are the blue ones are my social situations. So all the scenarios that were about social situations. Here's the actual scenario. Again, these are all gibberish. Don't try to read them. And then participant 1, 2, 3, etc., how they responded to this. And then how this is now the second scenario with different people. And then across the top is how we're going to code them.
So your variables up there.
Yes.
So and you can sort by scenario and by ID, right? So you could, except
Yes.
would one ID only be represented once in one spreadsheet, or would one ID have multiple lines?
Well, so in here, that's a great question. In here, all of them will have, so some of the surveys had two social scenarios. So some will only show once in the surveys that only had one. Some will show twice. And then some people, I think we had about 5 or 6, maybe even more, that did multiple ones. So, so yes, these are of like, wow, I've heard this before. Oh, it was the same person. That's important.
Good spots.
Yep.
Like
Mhm.
tendencies.
So again, these are only the social ones, all 360 of them. But so let me go back here and then we'll have time to answer questions. So we had to coordinate all the data in the Excel file. We had to read through the responses going back to the quality, and we had to flag the gibberish. Some people just put in like A space B to get to the 15 and they submitted it. Then we had about 2 or 3 literally just copy the prompt and then put it in. So they did not get paid. Some people do, and again, some people do an auto pay. That's why we didn't. It was only a few though. And so then we had to change their Prolific ID to their participant ID with a linking document that was kept separate. And then, so we had to coordinate between all of that. We had to look for the duplicates and adjust the IDs, which a quick Google search really helped me with this. Conditional formatting was actually very easy. And so then I had to adjust the IDs, actually probably switch those two. Combine the Prolifics and the Qualtrics data, much easier said than done, because Prolific data gives you anybody that even clicked on it. So there were plenty of IDs in there that didn't actually do the study, or they started it and didn't finish. So we're like, what are these IDs? So we had to match that up. Luckily, we didn't have anybody mess up, to our knowledge, putting their Prolific ID into the consent form. Again, these are people that do this pretty regularly and kind of know how it goes. But I've had this issue in other ones where it's like, here's your ID number, put it into the thing, and they put it in wrong. And you're just like, I have 2 12Bs. What does that mean? And then you check it 1,000 times and you have other people check it. And then you delete the identifiable data per REB, you know.
So working with multiple spreadsheets, very quick question. Are you like coordinating, IDs and stuff? Like, are you using VLOOKUP? Are you using like Excel tricks or? are
Excel
you-
tricks mostly.
Yeah.
So they're in the same spreadsheet. Well, so no, the participant IDs have to be separate than the linking document has to be separate.
Yeah.
But I use different tabs in the same one.
Mhm.
So I can't show you the raw data, but, and that one we did, yes, I Googled it. I watched a video and I said, there it is. And it made it 1,000 times easier. So the duplicates were one thing, and then the other one,
Pulling in their IDs.
is doing, because a copy paste. I didn't copy paste like, so I think it was VLOOKUP of like this crazy number here, we're gonna replace, and then the duplicates was easier.
We're big VLOOKUP machines
Yeah.
over here.
Google. Any other, so then the last -2 minutes will just be on like questions that you have about your specific studies. I'm gonna stop the recording here because unless there's just general questions for, okay. Did I record it?